Yes. Over there.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was fascinating. Now, before, let me preface my question by admitting that I've been a lifelong CPG guy, and I've grown up with a traditional aversion to hockey stick, the hockey sticks that you put up, right? But what that does do, and I recognize that that's real, okay? So I don't have a problem with that. I'm getting comfortable with it. What I am not clear about is how to look at the life cycle of that quote unquote product. Okay, because in a conventional sense, there are some strategies that have been framed over the years in managing those life cycles, okay? So the reason I'm asking this question is, for instance, Pinnacle, right? Pinnacle put up their chart and they had 2 billion in 3 years out. So 3 years out, when you do their, say, their cash flows for valuations, how should one look at it? Because I've also heard, quite rightly so, that there is a definitive short termination to the product itself. It could be through an acquisition by the big five, and then the product itself, as it exists today, ceases to exist. It gets morphed into something else, and that's pretty much what happens. So how should one be looking at technologies from an investor point of view, in that sense? What is the longevity and the sustainability of it from a cash flow perspective?
So let me answer the question in two different ways. The first way is that you can look at the technological development and the infrastructures as either a proprietary asset or as a public good. So there are different ways to look at this. If you look at this as a public good, then it would not be something that an investor would step in alone. It could become an investment for a consortium or for a different type of player, so to speak. If you look at the infrastructure that I'm thinking about Jio because it's the most recent example you have here. So obviously they committed a massive amount of money, and not everybody has that kind of pockets for this kind of investment. Once it's there, your goal, your strategic goal, should be to attract as many users as possible, basically to eliminate competition. And when competition is no longer there, you can monetize in 20 different ways. So Pinnacle being one of the examples. But the interesting part of this technology is that it creates business models that we cannot envision right now. So the question is, can you keep a share of that pie? What Pinnacle was saying, and I think that's very interesting, is that mobile operators or telecoms basically lost the ability to control these other business models or to monetize on them over time. So this is one of the warnings we have. I don't have a solution. I don't have an answer for you directly. But if you're happy with this, I think that this is a very critical question, and it's one of the things that I think we should answer. You should answer, in fact, but collectively. Because from the perspective both of an investor, but also as a startupper, it is a critical question. So I'm going to write this one down, and I will. I'm looking forward to continue this conversation if that's if you're interested. Thank you.
I'll come back to you at the startup.
Comment, not necessarily a question. As Indian investors and as investors who are investing in very early stage, we have to deal with two competing forces. The early stage investors really want to invest in cutting edge technologies like AI and all. The reality, as you pointed out, that these companies remain unprofitable for a longer period of time. The challenge is that the liquidity of capital in Indian startup ecosystem is far more lower than what is there in Silicon Valley, which becomes a challenge for early stage investors to bet in these high tech technologies which doesn't have a viable business model or revenue model already in place. And their path to profitability is somewhere 10 years down the line. So that's a reality that most of the early stage investors deal with in a relatively young startup ecosystem. So just a general comment.
Yeah, I agree. I think that Danny replied earlier on to say that you can create the initial boost, and then bring these startups to more liquid markets for other investors to bring cash in. I also believe that because of the size of the investment, not necessarily through acquisitions, though acquisitions are obviously a clear path forward. You could have more corporate venturing going on. So you could have more larger companies make this kind of investment in order to buy a sort of an option to an emerging technology early on, and they might be able to do it in a different way. I understand your concern, but precisely because the market is the cycle is so short of the investment, as an early stage investor, you could really just have in your case you could have a small fund on this type of fast growing technology that basically tries to exit very early on. It would require just a different strategy, I suspect.
Yes. This is not a question, just to answer one of the questions you asked. If the availability of data and the visibility is high, what will happen in a country like this? So one of the products which I have, actually I'm studying, and I'm not going to name the product because of confidentiality. A product which is to the producer or the farmer, so to say, gets him $5. Ultimate user in a foreign country gets at 100. And most of the money, except for processing of about $20, goes to the middleman. And because of this availability of visibility due to mobile phones and data, this farmer now is able to see that he gets only $5 while ultimate customer is paying 100 and the cost is only 20, and they have been able to actually extract now 25, which makes that people in this level are going to earn 5 times and change the lifestyle of several million people in this field for one single product I'm talking.
This is a perfect example where information is siloed and it cannot be shared freely, or is not, or it's maintained by a proprietary, like an asset, so to speak. That's one of the greatest opportunities. And nowadays you also have infrastructures like blockchains that let you keep a consistent track over time. I've worked with a company in Africa doing something similar for farmers. They realized that 50% of the products got lost in the transportation from the farm to the first storage. So that by collecting data, you can also bring efficiency and improvements. And obviously, the moment these people become more wealthier, so to speak, they also become able to invest in different things, in education, but also in improvements of their own technology. So it is a game changer, absolutely.
Any other? Yes.
No, yeah, you had a strong voice earlier, so.
By now they have figured out that you don't need a mic.
Yeah. So Alessandro, I have one question and I have one comment which goes back to the gentleman's question earlier.
Yes.
My question is, artificial intelligence clearly is an emerged trend,
Yes.
right? What are you looking at in terms of trends that are likely to emerge over the next 5 years, right? That's the question I have to you. And the comment I have, which goes back to the conversation with the gentleman back there asking about how do you judge whether a product is here, what the likely life cycle of a product is. And it's just an observation of how we have viewed it in the past and how we continue to view it, is fundamentally it goes back to the use case with the customers. At the end of the day, all of these technologies boil down to use cases and how the customer will finally adopt it into his life.
Yeah.
And the sustainability of a product, I mean, think of it as we used to commute, you use the example of automobiles. We used to commute in public services when we were kids because we had 1 car per house, right? And 30 years down, public services used by completely different people, powered by a completely different technology. But fundamentally, the use remains that the person needs to get from point A to point B, and therefore an Uber has a play, right? So the fundamental needs of individuals or corporations don't really change too much. There is occasion upon occasion where there's significant disruption, but 99% of disruption falls on that linear platform. So if you can forecast, if you can judge the viability of a use case and the sustainability of a use case, right? That's how we typically end up looking at potential life cycles for startups.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, if I could predict with accuracy what you're asking me, I would probably not be here. I'm kidding. No, but it's an excellent question. So there's a couple of things I can tell you. Another thing about the difficulty of making predictions here. In 2015, there was a big conference of artificial intelligence with all the world experts in the US. And during this conference, they have surveys to gauge the state of the industry and their perceptions about the future. And they asked these top experts, when is a computer going to be able to defeat a human at the game of Go? Go is a game of strategy. It's the hardest strategy game in the world, apparently. So all of these experts sat down, and the consensus was it's going to take about 10 to 12 years. The next year, this happened, right? So, so this is exponential growth, right? It's beyond the understanding of experts. Now that being said, a thing where we have seen massive improvements is in shared services. A colleague of mine from MIT did a research showing that every day in New York City, in Manhattan, in fact, there are 14,000 cab drivers driving around to serve the needs of the market. With an algorithm that they developed, you could provide a high-quality service with 3,000. Now, what does that mean? Does it mean that the market's going to collapse, it's going to change? It's going to change somehow. The service is just going to get better, probably. You will be able to do it with less material stuff, with fewer cars. It will affect the role of drivers. Eventually, these would be replaced by driverless cars anyway. So one of the things you will see, as you said, the need will still be there. The way we provide the service will be more and more directed by an algorithm of some sort. And there will be less and less ownership for several reasons. One of the reasons is that the technology that you nowadays pack in a driverless car is absolutely too expensive for anyone to own. So we would probably have a subscription service for a car that drives us wherever we need to go. So I suspect something like that will happen. Another reason for that is that if you are not in control of your car anymore, can you be responsible for what it does? Not really. So you don't want to be insured for it. So if something happens, it has to be insured by the manufacturer. So at the end of the day, it's probably easier for the manufacturer to just make the cars and give you a subscription for transportation service. So in a way, we're going towards a more service-based economy that way, less ownership, more sharing, and I think that large corporations will own the infrastructure more and more. But the biggest trends right now, the things where we see the greatest improvement, are definitely robots. Robots means any physical system that is guided by a software. Okay, so it can be a robot, an arm. It can be a driverless car. I mean, robots are not only Terminators, kind of thing. So you probably know that nowadays the warehouses of Amazon are largely managed by robots. And humans, have you ever seen one of those warehouses? Because if you have not, I recommend that you watch, there are videos on YouTube that are impressive. So in the past, you would have people running back and down the aisle to pick things from the shelves. Now robots bring the shelves to you. So you sit here, a shelf comes, you take an apple, put it there, then you take a heavy book and you put it there. And we do this because machines are not able they don't have the sensitivity yet, but soon they will, to grasp different items of different density. You can imagine if you take a peach with the same strength as you take a book, it's not going to be very smart. And the second thing we don't have yet is if you put a peach in the bag and then you put a heavy book on top, you probably deliver a smoothie, right, rather than than groceries. But anyway, the other thing, so the robotics is really, really going very fast. The other thing is the integration of different types of intelligence, which nowadays is if you look at it from the perspective of human intelligence, it's quite ridiculous that a software that can read Chinese and understand written Chinese cannot understand at all spoken Chinese. These are two completely different softwares, and they can't even communicate with each other. And they have no understanding of Chinese culture. For a man, I mean, the moment you learn how to read Chinese and you understand the basic of Chinese pronunciation, the two things are automatically building on each other. Now, we have very specific, separated, narrow types of intelligence that can't communicate, and I think that that's the next direction. And natural language programming. I think these are the three things I see.